Well, good afternoon and a warm welcome to this online roundtable organised by the Chatham House Ukraine Forum. This meeting is about the UK-Ukraine Strategic Partnership, a closer look at the new agreement. I'm Robert Brinkley. I chair the steering committee for the Ukraine Forum at Chatham House. This meeting is on the record and it's being recorded as well. And we've got a very interesting panel of speakers for you this afternoon. Let me just briefly introduce them in the order in which they're going to speak. First will be Mr. Igor Zhovkva, who is Deputy Head of the Office of the President of Ukraine. Mr. Zhovkva has held positions within the presidential administration and as Director of the Department of Foreign Investments and International Cooperation in the State Agency for Investment and National Projects of Ukraine. Then we will hear from Mrs. Wendy Morton, who is Member of Parliament for Aldridge Brownhills and Minister for the European Neighbourhood and the Americas in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Mrs. Morton was previously Parliamentary Undersecretary of State at the Ministry of Justice and an Assistant Government Whip. Then we will hear from Taras Kachka, who is Deputy Minister for Economic Development, Trade and Agriculture and Trade Representative of Ukraine. And Taras was heavily involved in the negotiation of this agreement between the UK and Ukraine, as well as the association agreement between Ukraine and the European Union. And then our fourth speaker will be David Riley, who is Deputy Director of the Eastern Europe and Central Asia Directorate in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. He was previously in the British Embassy in Washington and head of Kosovo policy in the FCO. Now, two of our speakers, Mr. Zhovkva and Mrs. Morton, have other commitments this afternoon. So they're going to speak first, and I'll ask each of them a question, but they will then be leaving the meeting, and we'll carry on with the discussion with Taras Kachka, David Riley, and then we're intending to leave a good 3/4 of an hour for question and answer to hear from you. The agreement which we're here to discuss this afternoon is certainly weighty. It weighs in at over 200 pages, and that's not even counting the annexes, covering all aspects of the bilateral relationship between the UK and the Ukraine. Political, free trade, strategic, that's just the start of it. It was signed during the visit to London by President Zelensky in October. And for once, I think the signature of this document really was a mark of a successful visit. It's a bit of a cliche you often hear. Leaders of states go on visits and they count the success by the number of documents they've signed. Well, this really is a very significant document. The context, of course, is that the UK is leaving the European Union, and Ukraine only in 2015 signed and ratified an association agreement and a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement with the European Union. So it was necessary for the sake of continuity to agree a follow-on agreement between the UK and Ukraine. But this agreement has also served as a vehicle for the UK to confirm its strong support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, as well as Ukraine's European and Euro-Atlantic aspirations. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our speakers. What did the UK? What did Ukraine want to get from this new agreement? Did they in fact get what they wanted? And how do our speakers believe that this agreement is going to change the bilateral relationship? So I'd like to start off with Igor Zhovkva. Igor, over to you, please.
Many thanks, Robert. First of all, really, I'm privileged and honored to participate in this kind of event. Very timely, very interesting, and many thanks to the Chatham House for usual practice of organizing such a timely, very important event. Thanks to you, Arisa, thanks to other people involved, and glad to have all of you here, and I think we'll have a really productive discussion. Robert, you mentioned this visit of the president, which took part exactly 2 months ago on October 8th. And really, it was, we call it in Ukraine a historic visit. First of all, really because of the substance of the visit, because, you know, the visit took place almost 3 days. And we had numerous meetings. We had a very good meeting, not only with the Prime Minister, not only with the Minister of Defense, not only visited several institutions and sites, but really the atmosphere of the visit was absolutely unique. Believe me, and you know it even better than me, that we had a very fruitful period in our UK-Ukraine relations. But, you know, this time it really was a real success. The agreement which was signed, and very important that it was signed by the President of Ukraine and by the Prime Minister of UK, is also a unique event, because I know that UK has already signed numerous kind of agreements with other countries. But correct me if I'm wrong, this was one of the first times when the Prime Minister himself signed it, and that this unique agreement consisted 3 components. It was political relation, strategic partnership, and free trade. So 3 important pillars were united together in one document. Yes, it was really thick. You saw the pictures probably, or the live video from the press conference when it was signed, and you know, it was impressive, you know, but the substance, which is in those 800 pages, is very important. So answering your question, I will dwell on these 3 important pillars we have in this agreement, and how can we practically utilize these instruments which are envisaged in this agreement. First of all, really political partnership is very important. You mentioned the support which UK renders to Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Yes, this is really important. And yes, by signing this agreement, we may say that we have a guarantee, the safeguards that it will last for a period of time, for a long period of time. That's what we need, really. We now have a real strategic partnership with between Ukraine and UK. I know that this notion is taken with big care in your country, so you do not name any country your strategic partner. The same practice we try to impose in Ukraine, so we do not have that many strategic partners as we used to have, I don't know, in 1990s, when practically after every visit we had a new strategic partner. The other question is whether that partner considered Ukraine a strategic partner. But this time it's really a strategic partnership with a clearly defined notion, what it is strategic partnership about, with a clearly defined mechanisms. Very important, for instance, that in the agreement we envisage a concrete instrumental things where our leaders can meet regularly together to discuss our strategic cooperation issues. We have this strategic, high-level strategic dialogue that envisages that President and Prime Minister will regularly meet on the regular basis. Preferably it should happen every year. By the way, we had the last visit of UK Prime Minister to Ukraine back in 1996, if I'm not mistaken. It was Prime Minister Tony Blair by that time. So we want to have a regular dialogue on all the important issues which exist in between countries, the regular strategic dialogue on the high level. And that's what we have in our agreement. We can discuss everything there, from political relations to, I don't know, implementation of sustainable development goals, from health to security, from energy to environment. But very important that we now have this mechanism. Very important that many important things for Ukraine are clearly fixed in this agreement, like, for instance, that both sides will cooperate in retaining the policy of non-recognition of the attempted annexation of Crimea. An important issue for Ukraine, an important issue for Great Britain, an important issue which is now fixed in this agreement. Really, and many spheres, including definitely the support of UK's strategic partnership in our fight against Russia, or tackling Russian aggressions in the east of Ukraine. Since we are here talking about broader scope of relations, not only about the agreement, I will also can't but mention another document which was signed during the visit, and I mean the Memorandum of Understanding between the government of Ukraine and UK and UKEF, UK Export Finance Agency. You remember that £2.5 billion pounds were envisaged to provide to Ukraine the support in the project in such areas as agriculture, defense, infrastructure, energy, and healthcare. So these two important agreements, plus the Memorandum of Understanding in the defense cooperation, this was the core of the visit. And now very important for us, for both countries, to utilize all the things which were mentioned in these strategic documents. I will just mention one thing, and I use this opportunity to tell it to all the audience today. This memorandum between the government of Ukraine, UKEF, envisages cooperation in the sphere of healthcare. We're pleased to get the news today that Britain has started, as I understand, one of the first countries in the world to vaccinate its own population. We read the news about the first UK citizen to be vaccinated. This issue is very important for Ukraine as well. Ukraine wants to start vaccination of its people, of its at least the priority groups of the people, no later than in January. But unfortunately, we are lagging behind getting the vaccine, which is now being distributed among the countries. So we really count on the support of Great Britain, for instance, in this regard, to start providing, at least partially, at least the amounts which you can to Ukraine. Why I'm mentioning the UKEF memorandum? Because it was envisaged that with this memorandum, the amount of money will be also can be also devoted to the sphere of healthcare and the vaccine. We talked during the negotiations with the Prime Minister Johnson on this issue as well, and he promised, by the way, to include all the governmental institution, all the relevant governmental institution in the issue of helping Ukraine with the vaccine. So using this opportunity, using this conference, I will ask my UK colleagues who are involved in this issue to look into this issue again and to start the practical process of getting the vaccine to Ukraine as well. Again, we are strategic partners now, and we'll take the support from the UK in this regard. A very important issue which was envisaged, which is envisaged in this agreement, is the free travel of people. You know, I was also involved in the negotiations. Where I remember the times when we formed the first delegation of Ukraine back in 2018-19. By that time, it were only consultations, not the negotiations, because practical negotiations were started only in 2020. But believe me, one of the important areas for this agreement to be negotiated and concluded was the possibility for free travel of people between Ukraine and UK. You know that Ukraine was fast enough to prolong the visa-free regime for the citizens of UK after UK left the European Union. So we have this agreement concluded throughout the year, and by 30th of January 2021, UK citizens enjoy the visa-free regime travels to Ukraine. At the same time, we have the Article 18 in the agreement, and sorry, but let me quote this article because I remember it practically by heart. We practically every word was, discussed in this article, but we now have that the parties shall establish cooperation aimed at facilitating movement of persons and shall, where the conditions for well-managed and secure mobility are in place, take gradual steps towards making it easier for citizens to travel to and visit each other's countries. Very important article which we have. During the visit, the consultations between the Home Office of Great Britain and our Interior Minister, Mr. Avakov, started. I know that they had a very good and productive meeting. We're expecting the first mission of UK Home Office to visit Ukraine by January. Okay, we have COVID, maybe not to visit physically, but at least at the video link. We really need to start these practical negotiations of free travel of Ukrainian citizens to UK. To start the dialogue means to maybe to have a roadmap. We have the example of our having the visa-free regime with the European Union when we had the VLAP, Visa Liberation Action Plan. We fulfilled 144 provisions of the plan, but in the end, we got the visa-free regime.
Mr. Zhovka, can I just ask you to wrap it up now?
Yes, and another important area which is important is the defense cooperation. We really count on the support of Great Britain in the defense capacities of Ukraine. We spent a whole one day devoted to the defense possibilities of cooperation and to the naval capacities of Ukraine, which should be, and we would be very satisfied if Great Britain would become a strategic partner in this sphere as well. So we have the memorandum. We are now working on the agreement with the exact figures and numbers. President spent 1 hour seeing the capacities of the British companies who could render in assistance to Ukraine. It's really important to have a new naval base built in Ukraine, both in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. So this is a third pillar of cooperation. So summarizing, Robert, I would say that we have a very brilliant and wonderful agreement signed between our leaders. Now we should have the same brilliant and wonderful utilization of all the wonderful instruments which are laid down in this agreement. Ukraine is ready. Definitely, I count that UK is also ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Igor Zhovka. That was a great summary of this agreement. I remember a more recent visit to Ukraine by a British Prime Minister. It was actually Tony Blair in 2005 when Britain had the presidency of the EU, and I was there to welcome him on that occasion. So it was still 15 years ago, but a bit more recent.
Still too long, Robert. Still too long.
Yeah. Okay, let's turn to our British Minister, Mrs. Wendy Morton. Over to you.
Thank you, Robert. And let me just start by saying that during my time here as a minister at the FCDO, I've been absolutely struck by the enormously high regard in which Chatham House is held around the world. So to be joining you today and to be speaking at this event is a great honour, because your reputation for independent thinking is unrivaled. And you only need look around our virtual table today to see your convening power. It's tremendous. So thank you for hosting me today. But it's crucial that despite the challenges we are all facing during this pandemic, that we continue a dialogue that promotes cooperation and mutual understanding between the UK and Ukraine. It's also essential that we celebrate success and the creation of new opportunities that benefit both of our countries. And with that in mind, I'm delighted to speak today about the Strategic Partnership Agreement between our two countries. In number 10 Downing Street, on the morning of the 8th of October, the Prime Minister and President Zelensky signed the Political, Free Trade and Strategic Partnership Agreement between the UK and Ukraine. It is the only agreement in the UK's transition programme that the Prime Minister has personally signed. And in signing, both he and President Zelensky reaffirmed the strength and the depth of our already close bilateral relationship. But they also laid the foundations for exciting trade and commercial opportunities that will benefit both our countries. It was not an easy process. The negotiations took over 2 years. They were hard fought with late night exchanges to meet the final deadlines. And I can confirm from personal experience that both sides pushed hard to get the best agreement for our own interests, as well as for our shared interests. And I hope that everyone agrees that this is what we achieved. And concluding this agreement during the COVID-19 pandemic was obviously a huge challenge. And so it's a testament to the importance that both sides attach to our relationship that we made it happen in the most difficult of circumstances. The result is that both countries have emerged better off. The total trade in goods and services between the UK and Ukraine was £1.5 billion in the last financial year. The agreement we have signed lays the foundations for that to increase significantly and to take our trading relationship to the next level. Key industries such as aircraft, automotive and pharmaceuticals in particular will thrive, supporting jobs both in Ukraine and here in the UK. We've strengthened our cooperation with Ukraine to be able to enhance our mutual energy security, to develop our green economies, improve our transport links, and promote modern and sustainable agricultural production. And our separate £2.5 billion UK export finance agreement will allow Ukrainian and British businesses to unlock these opportunities across key sectors. But the agreement goes much further than trade. It commits both the UK and Ukraine to our shared values of sustained democracy, human rights, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law. It commits us to developing cooperation across the full policy spectrum, from science to culture to security and defence. And it sets a key objective of supporting Ukraine's continuing political, economic, defence and security reforms, as well as countering corruption. The UK is committed to supporting Ukraine in these reforms. We welcome President Zelensky's commitment to widespread reform to tackle corruption and the progress that he's already made. These reforms are important for Ukraine's stability, security and prosperity. They will give the UK and other international businesses the security and confidence that Ukraine is a great place to invest. But for Ukraine and our partnership to succeed, we must also recognise the external barriers to progress. And that is why we have explicitly name-checked Russia's role in destabilising Ukraine within the text of the agreement. Russia's actions in Crimea and the Donbass undermine Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity in violation of international law. So we will continue to oppose Russia's hostile actions and support Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic trajectory. By increasing Ukraine's economic and institutional resilience, this agreement contributes to Ukraine's ability to defend its freedom and independence. And when the Prime Minister and President Zelensky signed in October, they didn't just ensure a more prosperous UK and Ukraine, they also ensured a more stable and secure Europe. This partnership agreement represents what a forward-looking UK can achieve with its key partners. And Ukraine can depend on the UK remaining a key partner and a friend as we broaden and deepen our cooperation through this agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I wonder if you could say what you expect from Ukraine as part of this partnership. Now that the agreement's been signed, I understand that the ratification is underway, is going through. But what would you like to see from Ukraine now?
Yeah, I think Robert, that's a really good question to ask, because partnership represents numerous opportunities for both countries, I believe. For example, for British and Ukrainian companies to work together and increase trade on both sides. That would be one angle. In terms of opportunities for the UK, as I've already outlined, it's important for wider European security by assisting Ukraine to defend itself against Russian aggression. Equally, there are opportunities for Ukraine and to see, it's an important tool actually for Ukraine to realise its ambition to become a prosperous, secure and a value-based country that benefits all its citizens. But I think equally, that requires Ukraine to drive forward crucial reforms that will not just help meet donor conditionality, but build the confidence of the investor community and support business. And, you know, Ukraine's record on reform since 2014 is impressive, particularly given the ongoing Russian aggression. But I think there's more to be done to build further that confidence. But, you know, I really welcome the commitment that President Zelensky has made to fighting corruption in Ukraine and to the widespread reforms, in particular to the judiciary. But, you know, equally, I recognise that this is not an easy task, you know, and that vested interests will seek to frustrate his efforts and, you know, potentially try and roll back progress wherever and whenever they can. And we've seen that only, you know, too recently in Kiev in the ongoing constitutional court crisis. You know, so I do recognise the challenge. I also recognise that 2020 has been particularly challenging for us all, in fact. But, you know, with the struggle as we all face and cope with COVID-19. But what I would also add is that, you know, we fully support President Zelensky in tackling reform and corruption, and that's why the UK began the Ukraine Reform Conference series a couple of years ago in 2017. You know, we want President Zelensky to succeed, and the Ukrainian people deserve that success. I believe that we and, you know, the international community support his commitment. But, you know, he knows that, like any good partner, we will need to be honest with him on what needs to be done. But you know, we're really looking forward to the Reform Conference next year as an opportunity to take stock, and hope we can use that as well as an opportunity to celebrate sustainable progress. So, you know, I think there are some really good opportunities for both the UK and the Ukraine to work on in the forthcoming weeks, months and years.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. That's great. I'd like to encourage all those who are taking part in this roundtable to think of questions. Either raise your hand under the participants tab or write something in the chat. I'm going to turn now to our two other speakers. First of all, Taras Kachkar and then David Riley. Taras, I was quite struck to see from the Ukrainian media in the last few days signals that Ukraine wants to renegotiate this agreement. I mean, we've got this big trade agreement which has only just been signed. I don't think it's even been ratified, and yet Prime Minister Shmyhal asked the British ambassador to start trade talks this month. So Taras, please can you explain to us what is going on?
Yeah, so I don't think that I have a lot to add because I think that Igor made a really brilliant presentation about our anticipations. I think that what I might add is that that's something what we discussed with Foreign Office, the DIT, and other and politicians from the UK is that this bilateral agreement introduces another track or another dimension into our into let's say regional politics and regional international politics and international trade, and namely a more vocal voice of non-EU European states. So that the EU is trends to monopolize the policy agenda, economic agenda, and regulatory agenda regionally. So even for climate change, it's the EU who said that they aspire for climate neutrality for all continents, yeah, for all regions. So that's, but at the same time we have Balkans, we have Eastern Partnership states, we have EFTA states, and now the United Kingdom as well, dealing in the region and having a lot of our own interests. So that's why I think that the discussion, so European discussion, will be of different kind. And for us, it's important to have them to have a stronger dialogue, more strategic dialogue on everything from trade to security between Ukraine and the EU, in order to make this broad European core more richer and better with better taking into account of interest of each other. So that's why for us this agreement is so important, because it applies not only to trade but also to all agenda to surrounding trade. So it's climate change policy, it's transport policy, it's WTO policies, etc., etc. So this is one thing. On another comment, I think that what is interesting and maybe surprising for all of us is that we don't know exactly the potential of our bilateral trade, because I think that the figures will be bigger than the statistics we have now, due to the fact that we suggest that a big portion of trade between Ukraine and the UK is done via other member states like the Netherlands or Poland or France. So that's why for me personally, and I think for a lot of other companies and institutions, it will be interesting to see how these bilateral trade relations are clearing and becoming better defined, better visible. So this is another anticipation, and that's why I think that it's so wise that we decided to have a really short period for resuming our talks on further market access under bilateral agreements. So I think that we will be happy to talk to resume our talks in 2022, and I think that by that time it will be a really clear picture about the trade flows, the real interests, which is, let's say, cleaned from the all other patterns of on the trade flows we have now, when the trade with the UK is done under chapeau of the European Union. So in my opinion, this agreement will be a really good sign for the region, for our bilateral relations, and it will show how surprisingly strong and interesting and competitive companies are in Ukraine and in the UK. It was a really big positive surprise in case of EU-Ukraine Association Agreement, when we have more than 10,000 companies exporting their goods to the EU. I suggest that this time it will be the same story. So that's why I think that next year will be a set of different positive news about this or other company popping up on a UK market and vice versa. So about UK companies on Ukrainian market. So that's why I think that this is really big success for Ukraine and the UK, and let's hope that next week all formalities will be completed and we will start to apply this agreement by 1st of January. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Taras. I think we probably all share your hope that we're soon going to see positive results, both for Ukrainian companies and UK companies, as a result of this new agreement. Let me turn now to David Riley, who's the fourth of our speakers from the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office. David, can you please take over at this point?
Yeah, thank you, Robert. I also want to say hello to lots of former colleagues and friends who are joining us today from Washington and elsewhere. But also, if I may abuse my time on the mic, to say hello to Dame Audrey Glover, who, as a young diplomat, she may remember I supported her in our campaign to get re-elected to the Commission on Human Rights in 2003. So the real sort of blast from the past to see Audrey on there. So hello, Audrey. You've heard from the ministers the sort of the high level and political context within which this agreement has been signed and will be implemented from 1st January next year. I want to talk a little bit about, sort of give it a bit of perspective in terms of how it's evolved and how we, the bureaucrat, sort of sees it from within the FCDO. I mean, we started this journey in 2017, I believe, when we sort of first agreed with our Ukrainian friends in broad terms that our goal at that point should be to sort of maintain continuity of the effects of the EU-Ukraine agreement, but in a bilateral context. That EU agreement should act as the blueprint for our future agreement. But importantly, that agreement, as Taras just said, should be viewed as a springboard for the future relationship, not a cap or a ceiling. So it was the foundations on which the future relationship would be built, not the limit of our ambitions or aspirations. There are ways in which our agreement differs from the EU agreement. As the minister noted, sort of largely in the context of Russia, its annexation of Crimea, the conflict it's instigated in the East and continues to fuel to this day, and the central part of that cooperation plays today in the UK-Ukraine relationship. That's one significant way in which our agreement differs to the EU agreements. There are others, of course, that are more technical in nature. We hope, as others have noted, that our respective domestic procedures will be completed in the coming days, actually, so that we can have our agreement sort of pass through our respective domestic processes ready to be put into force on the 1st of January. But sort of having negotiated the political aspects of this agreement over the last year, as Mr. Zhovka noted in terms of the mandate, the negotiations themselves, but having explored this more broadly over the last couple of years, the agreement now feels much more to me personally, I think, and to the UK government than perhaps we had envisaged when we sort of first set out on this process in 2017. The Zelensky visit was fantastic. It was so amazing in so many ways. It's one of the most productive and energizing that I personally have been involved in my time in the FCDO. And I've done a lot of inward visits and outward visits. And it was one of the most fantastic to work on from within the FCDO. Ministers from across our governments had genuinely productive and constructive conversations. They agreed to take forward work in areas that have been listed already, but the green economy, border security, defense and security cooperation, export finance, infrastructure, etc. And I think that, for me, encapsulates in many ways sort of the first big difference this agreement makes or symbolizes. It establishes our relationship as a genuine partnership based on a shared commitment to common values, to the international rules-based system, to democracy, rule of law, and human rights. And that may sound a bit much to call it that, but actually it represents a real maturing of the UK-Ukraine relationship. In 2014, Ukraine, faced significant challenges, requested directly support from the international community. We, along with many of our allies and partners, provided that support. But that's evolved now. We have moved from being a reactive donor to being a proactive partner of Ukraine. So the nature of that relationship has matured. And for me, this agreement reflects that maturity. It reflects that evolution in the relationship to something that's a genuine partnership. That you feel like that's the political aspects to it. In terms of the trade aspects, we have effectively replicated the trade liberalization that the EU offers to Ukraine. So there is no significant change. Taras will note TRQs on poultry and other bits and pieces, but there have been no significant changes to the trading relationship. But actually, negotiating this agreement, delivering this agreement, has created structure to our relationship in trade that will be deeply valuable, I think, moving forward. So, at the high level, a UK-Ukraine trade committee that will meet at least every year to discuss the relationship. And as Taras said, it's through that committee that actually we can both come to the table with ideas about how we can inject greater ambition, greater liberalization into the trading relationship. We have the appointment of a trade envoy in the guise of Baroness Mayer, who will be a focal point for us in the UK and hopefully in the Ukraine for tapping into those opportunities and those parts of industry and British business who want to invest in Ukraine, who want to work in Ukraine, who want to attract Ukrainian investors to the UK. So Brannis May will act as a real focal point for our energies. We're actually injecting significant additional resource into our embassy in Kiev in terms of officials who will be dealing purely on trade, both in terms of export opportunities for UK business, but also investment opportunities and inward investment opportunities for Ukrainian companies. So while the terms of the relationship have not changed, this agreement has given us the structures that allows us to really take advantage of the opportunities that the agreement offers to us. So that's how it feels to me within the FCDO. In terms of what comes next, I mean, we have ratification around the corner. Then I think you will see us through the embassy, through FCDO, through the trade envoy, gathering those groups who are interested in investing in Ukraine, explaining the agreement to them, explaining the opportunities that are open to them in Ukraine, brokering relationships between those businesses and counterparts in Ukraine, and then hopefully deepening and broadening our sectoral engagement. Agriculture offers huge opportunity for us in Ukraine, but also you look at things like steel, or you look at the IT sector. I mean, I know from my couple of brief visits to Ukraine that there is this sort of deeply ingrained entrepreneurial spirit in Ukraine with young people with ideas, and IT feels like an area where there's huge opportunity for sort of UK and Ukrainian and companies. There'll be many other sectors that we want to look into and invest in the coming years. And back to my sort of original points, this agreement is a springboard, not a ceiling. I think between when we first explored this agreement, I think our trade was about 1 billion per year. 2 years later, it's 1.5 billion in the last financial year, as Minister Morton mentioned. And that's during a time when Ukraine has faced elections, continued aggression from Russia, all the challenges that have been thrown at it. And yet that, that trading relationship is growing significantly just over a 2-year period. So there is huge potential here. And I absolutely align myself with Taras's points around, we will use the trade committee, we'll use our bilateral relations, we'll use the provisions of the agreement to ensure that where possible, if that relationship is growing rapidly and widely, then we seek to amend the agreement or liberalise further as required. Over.
David, thank you very much. And thank you to all our 4 speakers. I think we've had a great introduction. We've already got questions coming in. I think what I'd like to do, as there's one question specifically for Mr. Zhovkva. Is he? Yes, Igor Zhovkva, you're still with us. Good. Yeah. This is from Andriy Shevchenko, who has asked, the UK is identified as one of the 5 strategic partners of the highest importance by the new national security strategy of Ukraine. Could you please elaborate more on why these 5 specific countries were highlighted? Where does the UK fit into those big priorities?
Many thanks for this question. Well, UK fits perfectly well into these top 5 countries. We definitely count on the UK in terms of our defense and security cooperation, and in the broader sense of political support, which was mentioned today on the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. It's definitely in the loop of such strategic partners here as US, France, and Germany, for instance. All these 4 countries, we rely on those 4 countries in helping us, in supporting us, and giving us a supportive shoulder in fighting the Russian aggression. Yes, 2 of them are in the Normandy 4, and this is an important mechanism and tool we have, but it doesn't mean that those who are not in the Normandy 4 are not helping us. And really, we count on the support both the US and the UK in this important regard. So I can, dwell on this for hours, but you all well understand the importance. Another important area is the defense cooperation itself. And I may say that we have here the division of labor, for instance. Yes, in case of Great Britain, we count, and that's what I mentioned in the beginning, on the support in concrete sphere, which is naval capacity of Ukraine. That's why here we consider the British expertise traditionally, historically is one of the strongest. Because, for instance, we also have the cooperation in the naval capacity with the US, for instance. They supply us some ships or whatever, but the strategically important role of Britain should be here. And we talk with Britain not about only ships, like I told you in the beginning. Naval basis is very important example of how we can, of how Britain can help to Ukraine. And third important pillar is the trade and economic relation. My president is now saying that he will not even consider the possibility of visits or high-level exchanges without concrete economic results. And here, practically every speaker, I think, mentioned that we have a potential for increasing our trade relations, for increasing our economic cooperation. And this is the tools which this strategic partnership and free trade agreement is providing. So on these top 5, on each of the partners, including Britain, we count on the mutually beneficial economic projects of cooperation. We can say about current state of events, about current trade over, but definitely we still have many more projects to utilize. That's why, once again, it's very important, this agreement with the government of Ukraine with the UKEF. This is a potential for supporting Ukrainian companies entering the British market as well. So what is it? How can we call it? It's real strategic partnership between my country and UK. So I think these are the most 3 important pillars why we consider and count Great Britain in our top 5 priority strategic partnership for our, not only by the way, foreign policy, for our economic, for our internal policy, for our political dialogue.
Thank you very much, Igor. I see that Duncan Allen, who's an Associate Fellow of Chatham House, has asked a question. And I wonder, Duncan, are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question? You're still muted, Duncan.
There we go. Can you hear me now, Robert?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much indeed to our speakers. That was a very interesting set of presentations. My question is to do with the war in East Ukraine. The basis, or the possible basis for a political settlement, a resolution of the war is the February 2015 Minsk Agreement, which notoriously is subject to 2 diametrically opposed interpretations, Russia's interpretation and Ukraine's interpretation. Now, the UK has repeatedly said that it supports the defense of Ukraine's sovereignty against Russian aggression. Does that therefore mean logically that the UK unambiguously supports Ukraine's interpretation of the Minsk Agreement?
David, I think that's a question for you, the UK interpretation.
It is. It is a sort of wry smile on my face because Duncan taught me everything I know about the Minsk agreements. So he may even know my answer before it comes. It's good to see you again, Duncan. Look, I mean, I guess my first answer would be, if I were to ask 10 Ukrainian nationals for their interpretation of the Minsk agreement, would they give me one uniform response as to what that equated to? So whether we can point to the Ukrainian interpretation, and I happily will look at one, Duncan, if you want to, if there's one specifically you're thinking of, then I can consider it. What I will say is that one, we absolutely support our French and German friends in their efforts to mediate a diplomatic negotiated solution to the conflict in eastern Ukraine. Secondly, that whatever outcome is arrived at, and I am acutely aware of how difficult and how occasionally unrealistic that can feel because of Duncan's points around the respective and contradictory interpretations of what full implementation of Minsk means. But from a UK point of view, I'll tell you what it cannot mean. It cannot mean that somehow Russia manages to maintain a sort of a golden share on Ukraine's future trajectory. It must allow Ukraine to decide, and Ukraine alone to decide on its future strategic trajectory. So, if it wants to move towards Euro-Atlantic integration, it must be able to, and Russia must have no control on that. It must end up in Ukraine being exercise full control of the entirety of its territory and of its borders. I personally, if that's the Ukrainian interpretation, then yes, we absolutely support it. It certainly isn't the Russian interpretation, as I understand it, and that's not something I would support or my government would support. Duncan, I hope that answers the question, but that's essentially where we're coming from.
Okay, David, thank you very much. Just staying for a moment on the sort of strategic partnership aspect of this agreement, we've also got a question from Craig Oliphant from the Foreign Policy Centre. Craig has asked, aside from the purely bilateral dimension in all this, would the Ukrainian speakers like to see a country like Britain in the Normandy format? And from the perspective of the FCDO representative, is that option completely ruled out? So could I ask first Igor Zhovkva and then David Riley to comment on Craig's question? Should Britain be in the Normandy format? Igor.
Yes, many thanks for the question. Look, we definitely would enjoy the support as many partners as possible. So, and if you remember well the history of this issue back in 2014, the Normandy format in the beginning was not the first format. There were several formats in the beginning with much more countries participating in the formats. With the EU, for instance, participating as an institution in the formats with some other countries. For the time being, we have N4. And like I told you previously, this means that the countries who are in the format, the 4 countries in the format, should probably or are probably having their stance on whether to enlarge this format or not. And we have one country who is strictly against of enlarging this format on any country, including, unfortunately, the UK. So, but in this case, whether we should dwell on the format itself, spending many times about whether or not, or we would probably dwell on the participation of Great Britain, you asked me about Great Britain, in the process. We would always count and we would always inform our British partners what is going on in the format, what is going on in terms of tackling Russian aggression, what is going on in fulfilling the Minsk agreements, because, you can like it or not, you can discuss it, or not, but that's what we have on the table. Ukraine is always adhering to Minsk agreements, and this is the official position of the Ukraine that we all, and by all, I mean Russia as well, should fulfill Minsk agreement. And if in provision 1, if this agreement is the ceasefire, which should be unconditional and long-lasting, please tell me how many years we needed at least to have this ceasefire, which we're now having, unfortunately with breaking of this ceasefire, unfortunately with some shelling still going on, but luckily the people are not dying anymore. There are some, unfortunately, still casualties going on. But this was only provision 1, and how long it took one country to fulfill, to stick to this provision. So, yes, in answering your question, we would like to see Great Britain as much involved in the process as possible. And yes, we count on the UK in this regard.
Thanks. David, could you just give us a UK perspective on Craig's question?
Yeah, sure. Just to pick up a little bit on what Mr. Zhovkva just said there. I think Normandy, the Minsk agreements, let's say, I think can be deeply frustrating. The Normandy process has made, as Mr. Jovka noted, extremely slow progress. We support it, as I said earlier. I think we have to recognise that it has, we would argue, helped address some of the worst consequences of conflict in terms of bloodshed. It creates a framework in which ceasefires can be arranged or humanitarian aspects can be addressed. It does keep Russia at the table, which means that we, as Ukraine's partners, can hold Russia to account. And it remains for us a sort of core part of the ongoing international sanctions against Russia, which, as you will recall, the European Council agreed should remain in place until Russia has fully implemented the Minsk agreements. So, you know, it has its faults, but there are also elements to it which are positive. We haven't been asked. I know, like, I've seen lots of the media conversations. I saw some of the debates during the campaign in 2019 for the presidential elections. We haven't been asked to join Normandy. We're not pushing to join Normandy. We support our French and German partners. I think personally that the UK can play as, if not more, of an important role outside of the Normandy framework in terms of the support we can provide across the waterfront of issues in Ukraine, whether or not it is support for political reforms, whether it is training 20,000 Ukrainian troops, whether it is our support for maritime security, you know, whether it is the work we're sort of pivoting towards now, which is focused on not just addressing the consequences, the humanitarian consequences of conflict, but also looking to transform the conflict. And we're working with the Minister for the Occupied Territories closely on this. So I think we can play equally, if not more, of an important role outside of the Normandy framework.
Okay, thank you, David. Thank you both for those answers. I'd like to move now to some different aspects of this big agreement, and do please keep the questions coming. I've got one here from Oksana Home, who says, thanks for interesting discussion. Does the agreement include provisions on supporting the reforms in the energy sector in Ukraine? And if so, could you please explain more about this support and possible cooperation on energy sector reform? Taras Kachkar, please, can you start on that one?
On energy sector reform, so it's really interesting topic. I think that now we have a similar position towards the EU market. I think that for Ukraine, it will be interesting how UK policy on UK policy on electricity and gas markets will develop, because we heard from negotiators that there will be quite extensive chapter on access to grids for between UK and the EU, and for us it's absolutely interesting, because we will be in the same position in terms of like third states having access to energy markets of the EU. For Ukraine, it is this, you know, that these technical solutions to be applied by the UK will be of political meaning for Ukraine, because for Ukraine, this market access to gas and electricity market of the EU is a political guarantee of integration to the big market and energy independence from Russian Federation. But at the same time, I think that more and more interesting element of energy policy is green transition. For Ukraine, I think that we have a big challenge for getting rid of coal and transition to more hydrogen, to renewable energy, and all these elements which are as well heralded by UK government as a core elements of green transition. So I think that these two elements will be the most interesting in terms of energy policy and our bilateral cooperation.
Thank you, Taras. David, do you want to add anything to that?
only briefly, that sort of the agreement is so comprehensive. It's in the name, isn't it? I think that it sort of covers all sorts of issues, including energy reform and climate change. And I think we were delighted that Ukraine has joined, I'm going to get the name wrong, I think the Powering Past Coal Alliance, and that we're going to continue discussions, I think, with Ukraine on support for clean transition away from coal, as Taras mentioned. And we're also in lots of conversations with Ukraine about how we can provide broad support. So, for instance, Ofgem supporting their energy regulator in Ukraine, and on developing Ukraine's hydrogen sector. But these conversations are sort of quite sort of early stages.
Thank you. I see that Orysia Lutsevich, who is the manager of the Ukraine Forum, would like to ask a question. Orysia, can you unmute, please?
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you all the speakers, especially Igor, for taking more time. As I understand now, this is such an exciting conversation. And I think what is good is that we are as much talking about the past as the future, especially as the year comes to an end. And, you know, any agreement, bilateral agreement, it takes two to tango. And I think all these amazing opportunities that are in the agreement would be wasted, I would fear, if Ukraine is not really boosting its effort on improving the business climate, trade conditions. So maybe my question go to Taras Kachka, to those investors and private sector participants who are with us here. What is in the making for next year in terms of economic reform that would allow Ukraine to capitalize on these opportunities in agreement, especially with regards to improving access to FDI and business climate? Thank you.
So it's a complicated question because FDIs are dead globally this year. So that what we see, what is reported by OECD, that the level of FDIs decreased by 50% globally, 74% at OECD states, and Ukrainian statistics as well is devastating. So that we have several millions dollars of investments this year. So I think that this year is absolutely exceptional and from negative side. So that's why I hope that next year will be better. First of all, so we all suppose that the next year will be a year of economic revival, economic growth. And despite all developments, whether political or pandemic, Ukraine has extremely crisis-proofed economy, and you see that the inflation is quite low, the interest rate is quite low, the decrease in GDP is moderate, the decrease in export is even more moderate. So we hope that our export is really stable despite all the developments. So I think that from this perspective we are quite attractive markets. And of course I would like to continue as a classical Ukrainian politician saying that we will do our best in terms of defending investments. I really appreciate that the President Zelensky pays a lot of attention to this, and he has a lot of initiative with these investment nannies, big investments, and his direct involvement in negotiations of particular projects. But from practical point of view, we already have at least 2 successful projects on concessions this year. So for foreign companies, we have good projects on investments in port infrastructure and private investments, and also in agricultural infrastructure as well by global companies. Therefore, there are good signs that investments are possible in Ukraine. But after all, I think that the sober reply to this question will be that the macro financial stability and good cooperation with IMF and the EU will be best insurance for the stability and predictability of Ukrainian government next year, and as well slow and systemic work with better operation of banking system, and because our banking system is healthy but lost a little bit habit of credit in real economy. That's what the evolution we need to continue, and as well increasing trust to our corporate players for the foreign markets. So this is something which is long, extremely technical, but unevitable work, and I think that we will go by this path, and so that next year will be better in terms of successful projects. I believe in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taras. And that question from Mauricia about the climate for investment is obviously a very big one. It takes in everything from the war, what the judges are doing, anti-corruption, everything else. It's a huge area. I'd like to turn next to Artem Shaipov. Could we please unmute Artem? And Artem, could you please introduce yourself and then ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to the organizers and the presenters. My name is Artem Shaipov. I'm a coordinator of the John Smith Trust Ukrainian Alumni Network. And I'm very much interested in the role of civil society that, and I hope, has been allocated in the agreement in deepening the bilateral relations of the United Kingdom and Ukraine. So I was wondering if there is any role for civil society in this framework. Thank you.
David, would you like to have first go at that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Artem. Before I do, Robert, can I just come back to your point you just made on investment? I mean, I think certainly if you were talking to our ambassador in Kiev, if you were talking to DIT, if you talk to my colleagues who talk to businesses, when you sort of say to them, what do you see as sort of a key obstacle to investment in Ukraine? It's not the conflict, the first thing that springs to mind. It's predictability in their dealings with the courts. It's the concerns around fighting corruption. So I mean, we may get into a bit more detail on this later on in the conversation, but I would absolutely endorse your point, Robert, that I think one of the best things that Ukraine can do in terms of attracting foreign investments is committing sort of fully to judicial reform initially, widespread judicial reform, and then subsequently to sort of fighting corruption. But on Artem's point around civil society, look, a thriving civil society is a sort of centerpiece of any democracy. So while the agreement does not specifically mention civil society, you will see that it mentions in the numerous areas people-to-people links. And I think that sort of gets to the spirit of what you're asking, Artem, which is that, yes, we can have our sort of formal trade links and we can have our annual strategic dialogue, we can have our military exercises, but what sort of, if you like, defines a sort of genuinely close relationship are those cultural links, the academic links, the sporting links, the people-to-people links. And there's an emphasis within the agreement, Taras may correct me, I think, but within the agreement, which focuses on responsibility of the governments to promote these sorts of people-to-people links. And indeed, Mr. Jovka mentioned at the beginning that there is a particular article in there which talks about how we as government should be responsible for trying to facilitate those contacts, because that is the glue that sort of keeps us together in the longer term. It's as important, if not more, than those government-to-government links. So it's something that we definitely are seeking to encourage, whether it's expositions in museums, through to any other sort of think tank to think tank operation, etc. But there aren't really limits to it, but it's really an integral part of the relationship, I think.
Thank you. Mr. Jovka, do you want to comment on that aspect and civil society links between our two countries?
Absolutely agree with the previous speakers. Really, though this separate question or separate article, we do not have separate article on the civil society, but just look through agreement. For instance, the civil control over the defense sector and armed forces is being included in the agreement. So we do understand that in Ukraine this topic is very important, and carrying out, for instance, our defense and security sector reform. By the way, this is another important area of cooperation. again, this is very important for us, not only because we want to join NATO sometime or whatever, but it's very important for us to reform this sector as well. And we also count here on the support of Britain as well. So yes, we definitely have in mind that the civil society should play a very important role, including our strategic relations with Great Britain.
Thank you. I see that Katarina Volchuk, who is another associate fellow at Chatham House, has her hand up. Katarina, can you unmute yourself, please? Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And it's very interesting and exciting to see the new agreement, and would be great to find out a bit more about the origins of the agreement, because first of all, congratulations. It always takes, it's an incredible effort to put an agreement like this, and it has over 500 pages. But because it takes so much effort, usually those kind of agreements belong to a family of agreements that countries conclude. So it would be, from a comparative and systematizing point of view, it would be really interesting to know which of the existing UK agreements the Ukraine agreement is related. So in particular, basically, where does it compare with other similar agreements? So that's my perhaps question to the UK part of the round table. And to the Ukrainian side or the UK side, perhaps the issue of tariffs and customs duties and quotas would be, apologies, I had to dip in and out from the round table, but it would be really useful to know about the access to the UK market, especially how is it perceived, and especially what are the attractive parts in terms of access basically to agricultural goods and services perhaps as well. And the final question is really to Taras Kachka. And Ukraine has concluded now a number of free trade agreements, and they are all important and complex as well. And administering such kind of agreements, and as we've heard, there's a lot of concern to what extent Ukraine can actually fulfill them, does require capacity. So in your ministry, how do you assess, for example, the capacity both to work on the association agreement with the EU, but also on this new agreement and so many other agreements that Ukraine has either concluded, like with Canada, or just now with the UK? Does Ukraine has the capacity to manage them all? Thank you.
Wonderful, Katerina, thank you. Omnibus question. Let's break it down and start with David. First question was for David. Where does this big new UK-Ukraine agreement fit in the context of other agreements that the UK has?
Yeah, I've been involved in trade policy for years, and it's always quite a dangerous game to compare sort of one agreement to another and try to sort of liken them all, because each is, if not unique, then certainly tied to the specific nature of the relationship, the trading relationship, the political relationship. For the purpose of the Ukraine agreement, as I said at the beginning, our shared objective here was to try to sort of roll over the effects of the EU's DCFTA and association agreements with Ukraine as the basis for building our future relationship. And in that sense, it is most akin to the agreement we signed with Georgia last year and the agreement we are still negotiating with Moldova. But they themselves effectively have the EU agreements as their blueprints. There are lots of other agreements, I think 60 odd, that we've signed, the UK has signed as we sort of head towards the end of the transition period. A lot of them differ. Some of them are just trade agreements. They have separate political declaration agreements. Some don't have political agreements at all. So there's no one model. But in terms of Ukraine, it is most similar to Georgia and Moldova.
Thank you. Now, Kasia's other questions were for our Ukrainian speakers. Maybe I should start with Taras. Questions about market access and then about capacity in your ministry for delivering.
Thank you. I just to continue on what was said what was said on the systematization of the agreement. So that for us, this is a clear continuity agreement. So that the de facto what we made is that we edited our association agreement between Ukraine and the EU to the scope which will be applicable by bilateral relations between Ukraine and the UK, so that it was a decision from the very beginning that it will be a continuity agreement. So that's why the structure of tariffs and TRQs are of similar kind that we have in the European Union. So the key negotiations was about how to approach and how to define the share of the UK in these the EU tariffs. So we managed to negotiate quite substantial, rather broad approach and broad definition of what is the UK share in the EU tariff rate quotas. So as a continuity policy, it will be a good development, but definitely we would be glad to increase or get rid of certain tariff rate quotas after 2 years in 2022, when we will resume our talks on further liberalization, because we believe that there will be more demand for Ukrainian products which are currently partially liberalized. Otherwise, the agreement will be extremely liberal, so that in addition to these 40 TRQs, we will have almost everywhere zero tariff and free trade, actual free trade. And on administering agreements, I think that it's quite an easy task, because we have really good in terms of tariffs and TRQs and everything. So this everything what is connected with customs clearance, I think that our customs is quite efficient in terms of managing all these preferential agreements with checking relevant certificate of origins and then applying rules of origins and applying preferential duties. On non-tariff barriers, it is more sophisticated because I think that first of all, so we have let's say two major paradigms in our FTAs. One is that we have a broad reference to multilateral rules of WTO on SPS and TBT and IPR as well, or we have a commitment to apply stronger requirements, and this is the case of in the case of our association agreement. And here we have a clear understanding that our approximation to the EU is, let's say, biggest commitment to not only towards the EU, but to the rest of the world, that we apply EU rules in our domestic regulation. And this is like an additional guarantee to investors as well, and to foreign companies as well, in terms of predictability or clarity of regulation. So it sounds opposite to the UK rhetoric currently, but it is true. So that's why I think that in this ensemble of FTAs, we have very specific and particular place of the association agreement with the European Union, and for the rest of agreements, we have just like more simplified approach. And due to the fact that in our bilateral agreement with the UK, we apply this continuity approach. So it means that our bilateral agreement with the UK is closer to the association agreement with the EU than to classical preferential agreement agreed with other trading partners. So this is very simple and maybe naive reply to the question, which is quite complex. And I know Katarina knows the details, and she researches all these details. But I think it deserves an additional session of discussions about nuances of implementations of different FTAs. But in general, this if it defined in simple way, it will sound like I presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Taras. I'm sure there's lots of scope for you and Katerina to have a separate, detailed discussion. I won't try and get into that now, but I agree with you. There's a certain irony in the situation of the UK is leaving the European Union while Ukraine is trying to get in. But despite that, there is a huge amount of common ground which UK and Ukraine have been able to identify and put into this agreement. Now, I've got one more question. This time it's from Alex Trott, which I think has to be for David. What blend of carrots and sticks does Her Majesty's government plan to use in this partnership? For example, will FCDO prosperity programs and UK export finance copy and paste international financial institution anti-corruption conditionality into its assessments? I think I understand the carrots and sticks. David, you'll have to help with the rest of that.
I also understand the carrots and sticks, but perhaps not in the detail that follows. So I've been sort of working on. I'm going to be typical civil servant to slightly dodge the direct thrust of the question. But I mean, I've been working on Balkans policy and sort of European neighbourhood policy for the last 8, 9, 10 years. And in my experience, we have been most effective in our shared goal of driving reform where there is a demand from civil society for that to happen, where there is a willingness from partner governments for that to happen, and when there is incentive and support for that shared goal from the international community. And that's what drives the current sort of UK approach to our partnership with the Ukraine and to its reform efforts. And I think we've seen in President Zelensky's response to the Constitutional Court ruling a genuine intent from his office, from Mr. Zhovka, to sort of drive forward judicial reform and the fight against corruption in the face of increasingly aggressive vested interests. Now, all of our technical programs have elements to it that sort of require, they're not conditionality, there's certain things that have to be met, requirements have to be met in terms of us sort of deploying these programs. And I would be lying if I said that somehow the UK alone could replicate the carrots and sticks that the EU has to offer Ukraine. So we're in a different place to where we were last year. But we're not in the place where we want to be using sticks, I guess is my bottom line at the moment, because there is a shared goal between the UK government and the Ukrainian government to take forward efforts towards driving the reforms that are necessary for greater security, greater resilience, greater prosperity in Ukraine. And that's where we're focused for now.
Thank you, David. I've got one final question for Mr. Zhovka, and it goes back to something that, Igor, you said during your introductory remarks about the free movement of people. And I understand that for Ukraine, for your administration, this is a very important issue where perhaps the interests of Ukraine and the interests of the UK don't quite coincide. And we have a situation where since 2005, after the Orange Revolution, President Yushchenko said that citizens of European countries, including the UK, would not need visas to enter the Ukraine. And more recently, after the Euromaidan, the European Union liberalized the visa regime and made it much easier for Ukrainian citizens to go into the European Union, or at least into the Schengen area. That liberalization didn't apply to the UK, which is not in the Schengen area. Now the UK is leaving the European Union. Mr. Zhovka, from Ukraine's point of view, what should be happening next? And is there any intention to apply visa restrictions to UK citizens who wish to travel to or settle in Ukraine?
Many thanks, Robert, to this issue. Really an important issue for President Zelensky, and he discussed it in details with Prime Minister Johnson in their numerous phone conversations just before the visit and definitely during the visit. Like I mentioned, there was a separate meeting of your Home Minister and our Minister of Internal Affairs. Yes, we immediately done what I think should be done after the process of UK leaving the EU started. You know that back in January this year, President of Ukraine introduced a decree which prolonged for the citizens of the UK the visa-free travel to Ukraine. We do want, and we are both diplomats with you, that we know that the principle of reciprocity is a key principle in the relations of countries, including and especially in the terms of our strategic partnership relations. That's why we really want the process to be moving on. Again, I mentioned that we put this issue as one of the key and principal issues during the negotiations. And again, I thank the UK negotiators who understood their position, who inserted 2 articles in the agreement which now give the mandate to your government to start negotiations. Just before our conference, I had some consultations with our Interior Ministry, and they confirmed to me that they are waiting for the UK mission by January. And this is really serious. We want to start it. We want to make the checks. We are ready to provide the checks they want to have. I mean, our immigration service, our institutions, our relevant institutions, which are issuing passports, which are giving the Ukrainian citizenship to migrants, etc., etc. There's a huge, complex number of issues, and we are open for scrutiny. We are ready to all the inspections or whatever. We do understand it will take time, maybe longer time, but we will never cope with this, or we'll never have the result if we are not starting, if we will not start. Please, no prerequisites. COVID or other things cannot be prerequisite in this regard. We are using all these modern techniques and facilities for communication. We count on the progress from your part, from the part of Great Britain. Again, I see that there was a will, there was a determination on the part of your leadership. So we are ready to fulfill all the provisions or obligations or whatever Great Britain can impose on Ukraine. But in the end, we do count on the result. We do count on the free movement of Ukrainian citizens to Great Britain. We may start with such certain groups of people. We may start from youth, from students, for holders of special passports. I don't know, this is not the topic which is always like, but whatever. We can start with, I'm not saying that we should have it, tomorrow or the day even after tomorrow. But speaking of carrots and sticks, by the way, this is what Ukraine has deserved. We see the experience of our visa-free regime with the European Union. Nothing dangerous happened. The huge numbers of Ukrainians are not flooding the European Union countries. This is not happening. So you can count that Ukrainians, which will be coming to UK, will be civilized, educated, young, energetic, and willing to contribute to our cooperations between nations and between people.
Okay, Igor, thank you very much indeed. I'm afraid we have run out of time.
Robert, it's David. Can I come in very briefly?
David, very quickly.
Yeah, I'll keep it very brief. I mean, I think Mr. Zhovkova was right. I mean, I was one of those negotiators. I recall how tough that negotiation was. I'm really pleased that we found a way forward. I mean, I think Igor mentioned Article, I think it's 14 or 15. There's also Article 4, which creates an annual high-level dialogue between our ministers. That dialogue will look at sort of political, economic, and migration issues, and it's clearly understood that for migration, that includes visas. You know, we look at visas as a sort of border security issue. The EU looks at it as an immigration issue. That's why we were not part of Schengen. But I'm really pleased that Minister Avakov and the Home Secretary were able to agree to increase cooperation on border security and to a sort of cooperation between our officials. And we definitely want to try and make that happen quickly. And may I put on record that we're very grateful to the President for his decision to extend last year the visa-free travel to Brits going to Ukraine, and we hope that will be extended again beyond January this coming year. Thank you. And thanks everyone for your questions and your engagement.
Yes, indeed. Okay, thank you everybody for attending this roundtable, and particularly to our speakers, to Wendy Morton, who's gone off to a debate in Parliament, David Riley from the FCDO, Igor Zhovka from the President's Office in Kiev, and Taras Kachka, who very courageously stepped in at the last minute for his minister and helped us out. Thank you, all of you, and goodbye.